Banco Central, Brazil, 2005. In a small town in Brazil, a landscaping company rented an empty lot and started setting up shop. They planted grass, they put up signs, they hired workers who showed up every day, loaded dirt into trucks, and drove away. For 3 months, the neighbors watched and thought nothing of it. There was no landscaping company. The lot sat directly behind the Banco Central in Fortaleza. And for those 3 months, the workers weren't planting anything. They were digging, straight down, then sideways, 78 meters through solid earth, directly under the vault floor. The tunnel had wooden support beams, ventilation pipes, electric lighting, a small rail system to carry the dirt out in buckets without making noise. Whoever built it wasn't improvising. They had planned this the way an engineer plans a building, with blueprints, with measurements, with contingencies. On a Friday evening in August 2005, they went in. The vault held 164 million reais in used banknotes, bills that had been collected from circulation and were waiting to be destroyed. Untraceable. Untraceable because they were supposed to not exist much longer. By Monday morning, the crew was gone, the money was gone, and the only thing left behind was a hole in the ground that investigators initially mistook for a professional construction project. Police eventually arrested several people connected to the heist. Some of the money surfaced, most didn't. Around $70 million is still unaccounted for. The men who built that tunnel understood something most people don't think about. A bank vault is designed to stop someone who wants to get in through the front. It has almost nothing to stop someone who comes from underneath. Antwerp diamond heist, Belgium 2003. The Antwerp diamond district processes roughly 80% of the world's rough diamonds. On any given day, billions of dollars in stones pass through a few square blocks in the center of the city. In the basement of one building on Hovenierstraat, there was a vault. It had a combination lock and a magnetic lock. It had a seismic sensor that detected vibrations. It had a Doppler radar that detected movement. It had a private security team and its own alarm system. On the weekend of February 15, 2003, all 160 safe deposit boxes inside that vault were opened. No alarms triggered. No guards responded. Nobody knew until Monday morning when the first tenants came to check their boxes and found them empty. The man at the center of it had been planning this for 2 years. He called himself Carlos Hector Flomenbaum. He rented a diamond trading office in the same building and established himself as a legitimate businessman. He introduced himself to the security staff. He learned their names, their schedules, their habits. He brought chocolates on holidays. He stopped to chat in the hallways. For 2 years, he was just a neighbor. When the crew finally moved, they used a device they had built specifically to fool the magnetic lock. They moved slowly and deliberately to avoid triggering the seismic sensor. They brought a tool to bypass the light detector inside the vault. They had at some point gotten a look inside the vault. How exactly is still not entirely clear. They worked through the weekend and left with an estimated $100 million in diamonds, gold, jewelry, and cash. It remains one of the largest diamond thefts in history. They would have gotten away with it completely. Except on the way out, one member of the crew stopped in a wooded area near one of their getaway routes and left behind a partially eaten sandwich and some other personal items wrapped in a bag. Police found the bag during the investigation. DNA from the sandwich matched a man in the system. That match unraveled the rest of the crew. 4 men were convicted. The diamonds were never recovered. $100 million in stones is somewhere in the world right now, cut, resold, distributed, and nobody will ever be able to prove where they came from. The entire operation collapsed because of one moment of carelessness, one sandwich. Hatton Garden, London, 2015. The youngest member of the crew was 48 years old. The man who organized it, a career criminal named Brian Reeder, who had been doing jobs like this since the 1970s, was 76. They had all lived this life before, in a different London decades earlier, when they were young men with quick hands and a tolerance for risk. Most of them had served time. All of them had, at some point, stopped. And then, apparently, they hadn't. Over Easter weekend 2015, they targeted the Hatton Garden safe deposit facility in the center of London's jewelry district. The building was empty for the holiday. The street was quiet. They disabled the elevator and climbed down the shaft. They used a heavy industrial drill to bore through a concrete wall that was 50 centimeters thick. It took hours. The drill broke down partway through, and one of them had to leave, source a replacement part, and come back. They spent 3 days in that building. By the time they were done, they had cleared somewhere between 14 and 25 million pounds in cash, jewelry, and gems from the deposit boxes. Scotland Yard called it the largest burglary in English legal history. Catching them took time but wasn't complicated. One had been caught on CCTV near the building. Another had talked, the way people who have been doing this for 50 years sometimes talk, to the wrong person in the wrong pub. A third was found partly because of the white Mercedes van they'd used, which had been spotted by cameras across the city. Brian Reeder, the 76-year-old organizer, was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months. When police searched the homes and associates of the crew, they recovered a portion of the stolen goods. Not most of it. Somewhere between 7 and 10 million pounds from that job has never been found. There's something that sits with you about this one. These were old men, they had grandchildren, They had doctor's appointments and bad knees and decades of life behind them. And they chose to spend Easter weekend drilling through a concrete wall in the dark because, as far as anyone could tell, they simply didn't know how to be anything else. Knightsbridge Security Deposit, London, 1987. Valerio Vici grew up in Italy, came from a wealthy family, and by his mid-20s had already committed over 50 armed robberies across Europe. He was charming. He was well-dressed. He looked by most accounts like someone who belonged wherever he happened to be standing. In July 1987, he walked into the Knightsbridge Security Deposit Center in London and told staff he was interested in renting a safe deposit box. A manager took him downstairs to show him the vault. Once they were inside, Vici produced a gun. Within minutes, his accomplices had entered through the front door. They hung a sign outside saying the center was temporarily closed. They locked the staff in the vault, and then they spent the next several hours opening every box they could reach. The take was estimated at £60 million. At the time, it was the largest robbery in British history. Vici left for Latin America shortly after. He had money, he had freedom, and he had every reason to stay gone. He came back because he missed his Ferrari. The car had been left behind. He wanted it. Investigators had lifted his fingerprints from the vault and had his profile on file from his earlier crimes in Europe. When he returned to London to retrieve the car, they were already watching. He was arrested, extradited, convicted, and eventually transferred to serve his sentence in Italy. In 2000, while on a supervised day release to ease the transition back to normal life, he was killed in a shootout with police during what appeared to be another robbery attempt. He was 44 years old. The Ferrari that brought him back is somewhere in storage, probably. The £60 million is not. Securitas Depot, Tonbridge, England, 2006. This one required no tunnels, no drills, no disguises beyond a uniform. The crew had spent months watching the Securitas cash storage depot in Tonbridge, one of the largest cash handling facilities in the UK. They knew the layout, they knew the shift patterns, they knew the manager's name, his car, and where he lived. On the evening of February 21, 2006, a man in a police uniform approached the depot manager outside his home and told him he was under arrest. While he was being detained, another group went to his house and took his wife and young child. With his family held, the manager was driven to the facility and walked inside by people who already knew exactly where to go. 14 members of staff were restrained. The crew worked for 2 hours loading cash into vehicles. They took £53 million, the largest cash robbery in British history, a record that still stands. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in UK history. Eventually, most of the core gang was identified and arrested. One of the women connected to the conspiracy had helped launder a portion of the money. She made the mistake of appearing on a television program about wealthy lifestyles. A viewer recognized a piece of jewelry she was wearing as stolen property from the depot. She was arrested. Others followed. Around £21 million was recovered. The remaining $32 million has never been found. The depot manager and his family were unharmed physically. What that night cost them in other ways is harder to measure. Baghdad Bank, Iraq, 2003. 2 days before the United States launched its invasion of Iraq, a handwritten note arrived at the Central Bank of Iraq. The note was from Saddam Hussein. It authorized the immediate withdrawal of $1 billion in cash, American dollars, physical bills, loaded into boxes. 3 trucks pulled up to the bank. Staff loaded the money under orders. The trucks drove away, no alarm. No resistance, no crime scene, just a piece of paper with the right signature. It was the largest theft from a central bank in recorded history, and it happened in daylight, with full cooperation authorized by the head of state. When American forces entered Baghdad weeks later and searched Saddam's palaces, they found cash hidden in the walls, around $650 million in American bills, stuffed into boxes and sealed into the architecture of the buildings. The remaining $350 million has never been located. This one is different from all the others. There was no crew, no plan, no clever bypass of a security system, just the understanding that if you control the institution, you don't need to rob it. You just ask,